Alright, we're going to do a very basic Windows application, Visual Basic program. We're going to touch briefly on error handling and other typical programming scenarios that you may run into. It's going to be very, very basic, very few lines of code, very small interface, and we're going to touch a little bit on the properties of the controls as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go to File, New Project. We make sure that we're under Visual Basic, Windows, and we're going to do a Windows Forms application. Let's go ahead and name this Hello World. Alright, it already created the default form, our main form for us. What we're going to go ahead and do now is set some of the properties for that form. If we run it in its current state, it sticks it in the top left hand corner, and it's resizable. They can maximize, they can restore, they can minimize. These are not really functions that we want in our finished project, so let's go ahead and change those. Alright, so we click on the form. That'll bring up the properties in the properties viewer. The first thing that we want to set is the text property. Right now it's set to form 1, so let's change that to Hello World. Now if we look in the top left hand corner, it says Hello World. Alright, the second thing we want to do is the startup position. Right now it's on Windows default location. Let's change that to center screen. So if we run it, it starts in the center of the screen and it says Hello World. Alright, there's more properties that we want to change. Let's go ahead and turn off the minimize and maximize boxes. That's these boxes that we see up here. Minimize, maximize. So if we click on minimize box in our properties window and change it from true to false, you can see that it kind of dimmed. If we turn off the maximize box from true to false, they both disappear. Let's go ahead and turn this one back on just to kind of show you what I meant by dimming. If we just turn off one of them, you can see that the button is still there, but it's not enabled. You cannot click on it. Alright, so let's change that maximize box to false. Alright, the last thing that we want to do is change the user's ability to resize the window. And in Visual Basic, that's set by the form border style. By default, it's set to sizable. Let's go ahead and change that to fixed single. If we do that and run it, now they cannot resize the window. They can't maximize, nor can they minimize the window. We are still able to resize it in the designer though. Alright, let's go ahead and add some controls to our form. First thing we want to do is add a label. Let's go ahead and drop it on the form, and then if we drag it to the top left hand corner, you can see that little blue lines will appear on the control as we get it close to the edge. What that's doing is snapping that control to the nearest control, which in this case is the form that it's in, based on a padding and margin settings. Basically what that's for is to make your forms, your windows look uniform. They want them to look nicely. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time making sure that each one is positioned exactly like the other controls above it. The snapping just visually does that for you. It makes it a lot easier. Alright, so let's go ahead and set the text property of that label. Let's set it to your name. And you can see that now it displays your name. Since we're not going to be interacting with this label with code, we don't really care what its actual name is. So the name property we'll leave alone for this control. We'll go back to our toolbox and we'll add a text box. Alrighty. This is going to allow the user to type in text. So we're going to take input from the user. And again, we're going to stick it to the left hand side and up until it clicks against the label. We'll drag it out a little bit so it's a little longer. And since we are going to be interacting with this encode, we're going to change its name property. Let's set it to TB for text box name. And remember to use camel casing. The next thing that we want to do is resize our form so that it's going to look a little more attractive. Looks about right. One last control. We're going to go ahead and drag a button, and this time let's go ahead and drag it to the bottom right hand corner of the form and let it snap in. Again, we are going to be interacting with this with code, so btn hello will be its name. And then we have to go down and set its text property, which is what's displayed to the user. And we'll just change that simply to hello. That's it for the user interface. The next step is going to be code. If we push buttons, type text in here, nothing happens. Alright, the easiest way in Visual Basic to access the code designer is going to be to double click on the control that you are looking to code. In this case, the button. So if we double click on it, it's going to create its default event, which is the click event. So whenever the user clicks on that button, whatever code we put in here is going to be executed. So let's just make a message box up here. So we're going to do message box dot show to show the message box, and then in parentheses we are going to do hello comma space. Then we can end our quotations. Anything that we stick in quotations is going to be displayed literally. So that text is actually going to be displayed out to the user. We want to add a little bit more to that though. So we're going to do an ampersand, and then we're going to say me.tbname.text. And then we're going to add a period to the end, and then close our parentheses. So we're telling the message box to show hello, comma, space, whatever text is typed into the text box, and then a period at the end. Let's run that and see. So if we type in something, it looks exactly like what we expected. Hello, comma, space, the text that we typed into the text box, and then a period on the end. Looks great. Now what happens if there is no text? We hit hello, we get hello, comma, space, period. It's not really what we want. So let's add a little bit of error handling there. So right above the message box code, we're going to put a little bit more code. Let's put in if me.tbname.text length greater than 0, then, and then at the end of our message box text, we're going to do end if. So what we're telling it now is if the length of the text that is contained inside the text box is greater than 0, then execute our code to show the message box. So let's see if that works. If we put nothing and we click hello, nothing happens. If we put in something and hit hello, we get what we're looking for. Let's go a little bit further. Let's go ahead and make the form automatically clear out the text that's in the text box and set the focus back to the text box. So if we put in something now and we hit hello, as soon as we click OK to this message box, our focus is not in the text box. So if we want to change that name, we have to click inside the text box, highlight the text, and replace it with our new text. So let's have the form do that for us. So after our end if, we're going to go down a couple lines. We're going to do me.tbname.clear. That's going to clear the current text that's in there. So we want to add a little bit more code and do me.tbname.focus. That's going to set the focus back to that control, which is going to put the blinking cursor there. So if we put in a name, we hit hello, it says hello Jim. As soon as we hit OK, Jim disappears and we're back in the text box to enter another name. Alright, let's do one more thing. Right now, if we type something in and hit enter, nothing happens. Let's go ahead and change that. So we're going to add an event to the text box itself. So in the code designer, on the top left hand box, let's go down to tbname. And in the top right hand side, let's go down to key press, because we want to put code in the key press event. So now whenever the user pushes a key inside that text box, it's going to execute whatever code is inside here. Well, we don't really care if the user pushes anything other than enter. So let's go ahead and capture that event. So the first thing we're going to do is if E, which is going to represent the arguments for this event, which in this case is going to represent the key that's pressed, dot key character, key car. That's going to be the character representation of that key that was pushed. Equals, gets a little bit tricky at this point. We're going to have to do something called CHR. That's going to convert a number code into a character. So it's going to convert an ASCII code to the character representation. Now the reason that that's important is because we're going to use something called keys dot, in this case, enter, because it's the enter key that we're looking for. So what we did there is we said to convert this number representation, which keys.enter returns the ASCII number for the enter key. We're going to convert that to a character, and we're going to compare that to the character of the key that was pushed. So if the enter button is pushed, the character is going to be enter, which is going to be the same as this representation here. Doing it this way just makes it easier for you to program. You don't have to remember the ASCII key character for enter or for whatever button you want. All of the buttons are in here by default. If you wanted to change it to, let's say, the A key, you could change it to the A key or to the F11 or whatever button you would want. Alright, so now we're executing code if they push the enter key. The simplest way of executing the same code in our button click event is going to be to actually call the button click event. Now there's a few different methods. You could take all of that code that's within the button click event and stick it in its own sub, which I'll do for you really quickly. We could create a new sub here and call it, let's call it btn click. We could take all of this code here and paste it in there, and then we just call me.btn_click from both locations here, and that will execute the code as expected. Hello Dave. Hello Dave. Now that's one method. Sometimes that's not practical. Sometimes the code that's inside your button click event is actually going to use things like the E, the event arguments for that button. And then in a case like that, you would not be able to pass them that way. You can call these methods directly by doing me btn click. And you can go ahead and just pass the same arguments in. Now, doing it that way has disadvantages as well. Since we already went this route, let's go ahead and keep this code. That's basically it. If we put names in there, we're able to hit enter and get the result we're looking for. We're able to click the button and get the same result. That's it, with a little bit of user interface, 3 controls on a form, and a little bit of code. We've got a button click, we've got a key press event, and then we've got our own little custom sub that contains some small code to execute the actual functionality.